I'm Hal Macomber. I'm a little different than most of the people here in that I'm not in software development. I'm not in computer systems, hardware, any of that stuff, telecom. I used to be. I used to work for Lotus Development and IBM, before that Digital Equipment Corporation. But I've sort of left that whole field of software development and programming, and I now work in the built environment, architecture, engineering, and construction. And as it turns out, there is a lot that's the same about doing software development as there is about doing architecture and architectural engineering. And Kanban, as an example, is something that we're bringing into the whole world of architecture and engineering with really great success. Today we're going to talk about decision making, and I'm going to skip over how the world of architecture and engineering found the choosing by advantages decision making method, and I'm going to just jump right into let's go make a decision. And as we talk through how we make the decision, I'm going to introduce the concepts to you. I did a 90-minute workshop on Monday, and I got a lot of advice afterwards. It's like, no, skip all of the detail. We're smart people, just let's go for it. So that's what I'm going to do today. So here's the situation. Mr. Miller has an office at the Pierpont location. He's got about 700 square feet, and he pays $1,750 a month for that. His lease is expiring. He's been a little bit cramped. He needs some space for an assistant, and he needs a little bit more space for to have more than one client visiting him at a time. And he runs a small professional services firm. This detail I'm giving you is all part of a Harvard Business School case study, which has got some name that's titled Even Swaps. Okay, something like that. What I did was I appropriated that case and said, all right, I'm going to use that case, all the data, all the facts in that case, and teach a CBA way of making this decision instead of the even swaps method that that case was all about. So he went looking for alternatives. He engaged a real estate advisor, and they found 4 alternatives. And so he's now got 5 alternatives. One of the alternatives is to renew his lease at Pierpont, but now he's got 4 others. And they're not displayed in any particular order. They're just displayed here in this table. As he was thinking about what it was that might be important to him, he identified 4 factors. And those factors are the commute time from where he lives to where he works, the access that his customers have to him. Now, by access, he meant what percent are within a 1-hour drive. The next was what kind of service can he get with his lease? So could he get reception services? Could he get copier services? Did they have a break room? That kind of thing. And then the last factor is how much space did he get? So these are factors within which he thought that he might find an important advantage. So what you see in the table are the attributes for these 5 alternatives. So the alternative Parkway has a 45-minute commute, Lombard 25-minute commute, etc. Pierpont, his current location, is a 30-minute commute. Now notice I've underscored that 45. That's the least preferred alternative. It's the longest commute. Now what you might see in a table like this is someplace between where it shows here minutes, that's the attribute, and here, advantage, you might see criteria. And the criteria in this case would be shorter is better, right? Okay. So what you've got is, you've got the commute laid out, the customer access at Parkway, 50% are within 1 hour commute, 80% for Lombard, etc. So you can see how this table's built. And in the case of what percentage, what would be the criteria for understanding an advantage? Would more be better or less be better? More would be better, right. It's obvious, right? And so in this particular case, the criteria is always obvious. More, shorter commute, we all know this, right? More people within a 1 hour access. In terms of service, higher level of service would be better. And in terms of square footage, more office square footage would be better. So criteria is left off of here. But if we had a very complicated decision with a lot of technical elements to it, it would be very important for at least some of them to specify what that criteria is for determining what's advantageous. So as you see in each of these cases, the attributes are laid out and the least preferred attribute is underscored. And that allows you very quickly to see how an advantage is calculated. So let me give you the advantage on the first one. So Parkway is 45-minute commute. Now, an advantage is always the difference between of an attribute between two alternatives. So the attribute here is commute time, and the alternatives that we're using is, one would be the least preferred, which is 45 minutes. So everything is compared to 45 minutes. Lombard is 20 minutes shorter. 25 minutes, yes, 20 minutes shorter. Baranoff is 25 minutes shorter. 20 minutes shorter for Montana and 15 minutes shorter for Pierpoint. So Pierpoint has an advantage of it's 15 minutes shorter. Now that kind of sounds crazy. It's a 30-minute commute. It's shorter than what? It's shorter than an alternative that I'm considering. It's not shorter than the place where I currently have a lease because I'm considering 5 alternatives now. It's like starting fresh. So you see that the advantage is, an advantage is always determined between exactly the attributes of 2 alternatives and against the attribute that's least preferred. The alternative with the attribute that's least preferred. So we get 20 minutes shorter, 25 minutes shorter, etc. Also notice that there's an word with that 20 minutes. It's shorter. It could be better, longer. That you want you want to be able to point to a difference, a comparative. An advantage is always stated as a comparative. In fact, anyone can you quickly just say what an advantage is? Anybody here? Everyone except Jason, because he had the pleasure of going through this on Monday. It's better, yes. Related to another one. So it's a beneficial difference. So there's always a difference, but in the case of an advantage, it's a beneficial difference. Very simple definition. So what you see here is we circled 20 minutes shorter. That 20 minutes shorter is most advantageous for that attribute. So Baranoff has the most advantageous commute. It's 25 minutes shorter than the least preferred alternative that we're willing to consider. There could be other ones out there that are worse than that, but these are the ones that we're willing to consider. So as we're going through and putting the table together, we circle it as we go. So we can very quickly see what's most advantageous, what was everything compared to here. Everything was compared to least preferred, the 45-minute commute. So let's look at the next one. Quickly, what's most advantageous here? What'd you say? Montana, right. So Montana has 35% more people, more clients within the 1-hour commute. Now, notice there's a mistake here. What's the mistake? What did I say about advantages? Advantages are always stated with yes, a comparative word. So it should have said, for Lombard, 30% more clients. 20% more clients for Baranov. For the most preferred, 35% more clients. You see that? Okay. So next one. What's most preferred here? Pardon me? Parkway or Montana. They are the same. And what do we mean by A, B, C? It's not numerical now. So we're going from a good deal of data. When you look at the rest of the factors that we're considering, it's like hard data. But when we say Class A space, Class B office space, Class C office space, what does that mean? Well, if you're a real estate agent, it's a way of in a kind of loose-handed way, speak about the collection of services that you'll get, the quality of the space, often the newness of the space, certainly the newness of the furnishings in the space. And so Class A space, Class B space, Class C space is a kind of shorthand. But it's also an opinion, right? Because one person might say Class A, another would say, not my standards, that's B plus space. Now, for the sake of what we're doing here, it's absolutely okay. Number one, you have objective data and you have subjective data. Objective data is 45 minutes commute. Subjective data is Class A space. It could be nice color, right? That's subjective. When somebody is saying, I think the color is nice. When we make decisions, I'll say an extreme subset of the decisions we make in our lives, there's always subjective data involved. In some way, there's subjective data. And here, that subject data is the level of service that's available in that space. So we have Class A space, B space, and C space. C is underscored, both his current location at Pierpoint, as well as his space at Baranov. He characterized as Class C space. And that's the important thing, right? That the key stakeholders are characterizing their space. Now, some people are able to do that and some people are not able to do that. There's another principle here that you need to anchor your decisions on relevant facts. And both relevant objective data and relevant subjective data. Now, he may be a person who couldn't distinguish between Class A, Class B, Class C space. So what might you do? Well, you might tap a real estate agent and say, help me understand this space. Just like any of you who do systems design work, and you've got a customer that wants you to do that, it's easy to see that you could have customers who are trying to make a decision on what to do, and they need your expertise so they can know what to do. Do I do it program in Ruby? Do I program in JavaScript? Do I use a NoSQL database? Do I use a SQL database? It's like, why would I do that? So you need to include people who can anchor your decisions to relevant objective and subjective data. And that generally means a community, right? And it can be a small community. It can be you and one other person if you bring that expertise. But you may not bring that expertise. So you have to pull people together around you to anchor your decisions appropriately. Notice the way we talked about it is, we also made the mistake here. It says for service, much better. It's much better service. So it should say, like, exactly what's the advantage. It's much better service. It's better service. That's the way you want to write your advantages. And I use this example so I can teach what's there and what's not there. And then for the final one, we see what's least preferred, and Montana is most advantageous in terms of there's 450 more square feet. You see that? Okay, so now we have all the attributes identified here. We also have all the advantages identified here. And we know which are the most advantageous on a factor-by-factor basis. So now what do we do? Well, there's a principle that decisions must be based on the importance of advantages. So not just the number of advantages. Notice when you look at that attribute, that alternative, Montana, it has the most preferred advantages, most advantageous. Pardon me. And so some people would say, oh, well, it has 3, 1, 2, 3, okay, we're going with Montana. Well, that's not, now you're not talking about importance here, right? So decisions must be based on the importance of advantages. Now, what about disadvantages? Should we be basing our decisions on disadvantages too? How many people use a pros versus cons approach when making decisions? Any of you on a regular basis use that? Yeah. So a reason pro for something, a reason pro for Montana is it has 950 square feet. A reason con for Montana is what? The cost. It's the most expensive. So, but what are we talking about when we say cost and 950 square feet? We're talking about attributes of an alternative. That's in conflict with the fundamental rule, which is decisions must be based on the importance of advantages. When you think about, just step back, any decision that you might make, looking for beneficial differences, right? Additional value to you is what we do. And we don't necessarily always express it as we're doing here, a 25-minute shorter commute. Right? That's a beneficial difference. And would a 25-minute shorter commute be important to you? Yeah, probably. Probably really important to you. So what we do in the choosing by advantages way of making a decision is we understand where all those beneficial differences are, where all the advantages are, and then give importance to it. So knowing a little bit about Mr. Miller, of the 4 circled advantages, these are the most important, most advantageous alternatives for a factor, right? Which one do you think is paramount to Mr. Miller? In other words, what is the most important of all of those four? What'd you say?
Do we need to ask him?
Well, I set the stage for you, so maybe you didn't remember. Yeah. Why was he looking?
Because he wanted more space in his office.
It was crowded. He needed to be able to have another client in there, in kind of private from a client he's working with, and also additional staff. So that's why he went looking. Now, 450 more square feet, that's a pretty big advantage. That could be 4 12-foot by 12-foot rooms, right? 3 or 3.5 12-foot by 12-foot rooms, right? That's a lot of space. So that's, in this particular case, when you look at that as compared to, well, is 450 more square footage more important or less important than a 25-minute commute? 25-minute shorter commute. It's probably more important. Is it more or less important than 35% more clients? Maybe hard to tell, right? You read the case, he's really cramped, right? So to your point, yes, we maybe need to ask Mr. Miller. The case allowed me to do that. I read it so many times. He uses the expression cramped. He uses the expression he can have one client at a time. He has to take care to schedule. If he only got 50, if he was looking at something and he had only 100 more square feet as the most advantageous. So if Montana was only 100 square feet more, what might be more important, 100 more square feet or 35% more clients within a 1 hour? Or a 20-minute shorter commute, right? It's like 100 more square feet, like 5 more square feet. Would that be really important? No, that wouldn't be important. So what you have to do is you really have to gauge the participants, the stakeholders in the decision, and it's relative, right? This is subjective. It's subjective for the people who are involved in the decision. In this case, he said it's 450 more square feet as compared to the other advantages that he found was most important. And so we gave it 100 points. Now, where did the 100 points come from? We could give it 10 points. It's the most that we're going to use on our scale, whatever our scale is. So 0 to 10, to 100, to 20. Typically, if you have a small number of alternatives and a small number of factors, then you can use a small scale. 0 to 10, 0 to 20. In this particular one, we have 5 alternatives, we have 4 factors, and so I used a scale that went to 100. That's arbitrary, but doesn't actually affect anything. We're using the same scale throughout this whole thing. So now we've identified the paramount. What we want to do is look at all the other circled advantages. So which one do you suppose is next most important to Mr. Miller? Would it be much better service in his space? 35% more customers within a 1 hour commute, or 25 minutes shorter? It's probably a toss-up between the shorter commute and the more clients within a 1 hour. And if we had time to read the case, this is what you'd find, that having his clients closer to him so they're less inconvenienced, he gave that 80 points. So what he said was, all right, this is paramount, the space is paramount. Is it, if I give that 100 points, is having 35% more clients within a 1 hour commute to me, is that half as important? No, it's more than half important. Is it 3/4 important? No, he said it's more important. Now, so he finally said, okay, it's about 80% as important to me. And so we gave it 80 points. And then we said, well, what's next? He said the shorter commute. Is that a lot less, or is that really close? And one of the reasons to use a 100-point scale versus a 10-point scale is because there's a big difference between 8 and 7. On a 100-point scale, you could put 80 and 78, right? And with lots of alternatives and lots of factors, getting that granular can help. Now, what are we doing with these numbers? Those of you who are math folks in here, what kind of numbers are we talking about when we say the importance is 100, the importance is 80? What kind of numbers are those? They are whole numbers, but we could have said 78.5, right? And that's no longer a whole number, but it's still a certain kind of a number. What kind of number is it? How is that number different from 25 minutes? What's the difference between the importance of 100 and the time of 25 minutes? Yeah, so, right. And we call that an ordinal number. Remember? That's an ordinal number. Whereas 25 minutes, cardinal. We can validate it's exactly 25 minutes or it's not. Right? We can prove that. Inside this community, we would all accept that proof. Right? And we might talk to some people in the world, they don't know what we're talking about, but we could validate that number. Can we validate 80? No. But what we can say about 80 is it's in the right order. So there's nothing between 100 and 80. It could have been 40. But as long as it's in the right order, this method works. And we've worked on this. We've played like screw around. Like, can we make this decision come out the way we want to? Well, if you stay true to the order, you're not... Order and relative position, you aren't going to mess it up. If you're staying true. Now, there are people who will manipulate just about anything, right? And so they won't stay true in that conversation. But you aren't going to get a bad decision, an unsound decision, if you do a good job of slotting these numbers in. So what we've done here, by giving importance to those most advantageous factors, is we now have a scale from which to give importance to the remaining advantages that we find. So what we do is go back to, what's the factor that held the paramount advantage? Well, it was square feet. So what we see on square feet is that Parkway has 300 more square feet. That's an advantage. Lombard has 200, and Pierpoint has 200. So Mr. Miller has to decide, all right, let's look at that 300 more square feet. Is that more, that 300 more square feet, more or less important than the 35% more customer access, which we gave 80 points to? You see that here? We have 100. The next number we have on the scale is 80. So what we know is this 300 is less than 100, but is it more than 80 or is it less than 80? Well, you don't know, but I do. He said that it's worth 60. And that this is worth 45. You see? And then what we did was we built all this out. And so you see these numbers across the board where for that scale, we kept slotting these in, each time saying, is that more or less important to you? Does it fit above this one or below that one? How close is it? It's that conversation. Now we're talking about me and Mr. Miller having this conversation, but you can do this in a group of this size. At about 12 people is where you start running into problems. But it's only a problem of facilitation. It's not, if they're committed to making a decision, it's not really a problem for the group. So what we now have is importance for all the advantages that we find. So let me give you a little mnemonic to remember to go through this. So we call it triple A it. Triple A, I, T. First A is alternative. So you start the process by identifying your alternatives. We did that. 5 alternatives. You then go through and identify the relevant attributes. Alternative, attribute. Then you find the differences, the beneficial differences among the attributes and its advantages. Then you give importance to the advantage, and then finally you give total importance. And so when you add this up, what you see is Parkway, the advantages that we found on Parkway had 120 points of importance for us. And across the board, the one with the most importance points is Montana. Now, do we know what to pick? We can see that for $1,900, we can have advantages that have 300 points worth of importance to us. But we have a range here. Mr. Miller didn't want to take any property that cost more than $2,000. Sure. So it's alternative, attribute, 25 minutes would be the attribute for the commute. It's advantage, importance of advantage, and total importance. Triple A it. Simple process. You can do it every time, and you won't come out bad, right? You'll get a good start on that. So what we see now is we have importance for each one, total importance for each one, and the cost for each one. Now, I want to introduce you to another concept. It's called dominance. Why would we take Parkway, where there's 120 points and it's $1,850? Why would we take that? Is there any of these up there that are better than Parkway? Well, sure. This one right here. I get 250 points importance of advantages, and I only have to spend $1,700. So Lombard dominates Parkway. In other words, when we look at importance of advantages and the costs we have to pay, we get more importance and we pay less money. That's called dominance. And dominance happens all the time among alternatives, and we don't necessarily notice that right away. Does Lombard dominate any other alternatives? Does this one here dominate any other alternatives? Which one? This one, right? Pierpoint. Only 155 importance points and $50 more. So quickly in this table, we can, through dominance, exclude 2 of the alternatives. You all see that? At least Lombard costs less and it gives you more of what you're looking for, more of the advantages that are important to you, than their current location and parkway. So in this moment, Mr. Miller knows what? He knows he's going to move. Not it clear, everyone? So now what do? We have three legitimate alternatives. We have one, the least costly one, 1,500 points, $1,500, 1,220 points, followed by Lombard, followed by Montana. Now, would Miller consider Baranoff? What's going for Baranoff? The only thing going for Baranoff is it's cheaper. Why would he take 500 square feet when today he's got 700 square feet and he's cramped? In fact, he wouldn't. Why he was considering it, I don't know, but he was. He was considering it. And so we're really down to Lombard and Montana. And so what do we do about Lombard and Montana? For $1,700, he can get advantages with 215 points of importance. He can get advantages of 300 points of importance, 85 more points by spending $200 more. Should he do it? It what? Well, it's square footage, much better space, much more clients within the commute time, within a 1 hour drive. So what do we need to consider to say he's definitely better off going to Lombard, right? Everyone see he's better off? For him, no. Why no?
You're saying he's better off going to Lombard?
He's getting 250 advantages that he said are important to him, 215 versus where he's at, 155. So he's getting 60 more points of importance and he spends $50 less. Is that a no-brainer? Yeah, that's actually a no-brainer. He can easily move in there. Now, what does he need to consider? He needs to consider, why would I go to Montana? And it cost him $200 to go there. Well, what else would he spend the $200 on? He could spend it on marketing every month. He could spend that $200 on something else. And now he needs to say, is there something else with 85 points of importance that he could get for $200? Now, we don't know. Reading the case, he was willing to spend $2,000. He's not going to get more space if he takes Lombard, but he gets more of everything else. So he's still cramped. He's now got more clients within a 1 hour drive. He's more likely to have more clients wanting to be in his space. So the whole thing looks like, yes, he should take Montana, but what we don't know, and because the case didn't say, what would he do with that $200 a month? What else might he do? And we don't know. But that's what it comes down to. So those of you who took engineering economics, that's the fundamental thing that you're looking with money. It's what other utility could I get with that additional money I'm spending? And you have to look more broadly in your whole business to understand that. So this is where we are. What I'd like to do now is just go over the four principles that were at play here. So, that we must learn and skillfully use sound methods. I showed you one method. There's 12 of them in the CBA decision-making system. Only a couple are more complicated than this. Most of them are much more simple than this. The second one is decisions must. Must. Not should, not sometimes it would be nice to, but must be based on the importance of advantages, and not advantages and disadvantages. Third, we need to have our decisions anchored to the relevant facts, both objective and subjective, and sometimes that means tapping others. And then different decisions call for different methods. Thanks. Okay, so with that, these slides will all be available to you. Comments, questions? What do you see in this way of making decisions?
I was just curious, why wasn't cost just a factor?
Well, cost is so why isn't cost a factor? Cost is so important that we treat it as a special factor. That if you notice this, for $1,500, I can buy something that's 120 points of importance. I spend $200 more, I get 215. I spend $200 more, I get 300. So what we're looking there is the utility that our spending is going to provide us. In the first case, going from 120 to 215, $200 gets us 95 points. Going from 215 to 300, another $200 gets us 85 points. The first one was an easy decision to make because it's still less than I'm spending. The second one is there something else I could spend that money on and get that kind of utility? How about somebody else? I only got another minute here. Yeah.
So, have you read the Predictable Irrational?
Predictably irrational, yes. Absolutely.
To me, it seems like if you put in the advantages and the importance after you put in the attributes, you would tend to favor the things that you intuitively or unconsciously are favoring.
Yeah, so what Dan Ariely, who wrote the book Predictably Irrational, doesn't say that we always are irrational. We have the capability for rationality. We absolutely do. But irrational, we can be emotionally irrational, and we can be blind to our biases. And there's other ways we can talk about this too. If you start talking about your biases, and you particularly that decisions must be anchored to the relevant facts, you include in your decision-making process people who can help you be relevant, then you can get in front of that. And in this particular case, sure, people they have a leaning, but that's bias is a leaning, right? We have a leaning. Can we acknowledge that we have a leaning? If we can acknowledge we have a leaning, then we can win. We can do a better job than we were going to do. So there's a lot here in choosing by advantages, like in the whole conference about decision making, biases and irrationality, and it goes on and on. But it typically happens is, as I said about giving importance, and if you can be honest about what you're doing, and it sometimes means we have to have people around us so that we can be honest with ourselves about what we're doing, then we can do that in a kind of rational way.
I have a question.
Yeah, Alexei.
In your experience applying this model, does the importance of advantages adequately protect minimal needs so that I don't include options, let's say this list of 5 for Mr. Miller, but that don't meet his minimal needs?
Right, so we have should and must. We have want and must criteria. He might have said, I must have at least the same square footage as I have today. Had that been the case, Baronoff would have dropped out. It didn't meet a must criterion. So I don't, like I said, I don't know why Miller included it. I know why the authors included it. Because they were teaching something called even swaps. And you can read about that some other time.